Hey guys, so I hope you're all having a wonderful day. That being said, I'm going to be addressing very sensitive topics in this video, mainly rape and sexual assault. So please watch this with caution, and if you're not in the right place to hear about this sort of thing, maybe just skip it altogether. Also, this is a very sensitive topic for me personally, and I really want to make it clear that I'm going to be sharing my personal thoughts on the matter. I'm obviously not speaking for everyone. My point is precisely that all experiences are valid, and there isn't one way of perceiving it that should dominate or eclipse other experiences. So this is just me talking about my own feelings on the matter. Share them or not, agree or disagree, it's all fine. So if you watch my other videos, you may have noticed that there is a certain pattern, a certain something that really motivates me to talk about a certain topic, and that is when I feel like the media that I consume, regardless of whether I like it or not, represents female sexuality, female experience, or femininity in general in a way that I find harmful. But today I feel like talking about what it looks like when a specific experience is represented perfectly, and hopefully at the same time highlight the importance of good representation. So let's talk about a show that I actually enjoyed for once. Well, more like adored, to be honest. Let's talk about the British-American drama television series created, written and co-directed by Michaela Coel, who is also the lead actress in the series, I May Destroy You. Right, so I'm not going to get into any spoilers because it is a show that is truly worth watching, but the premise of the series is pretty much about how people overcome sexual assault and rape. Again, I'm going to be discussing these matters pretty explicitly, so if you feel like this conversation is likely to trigger you in any way, don't feel bad about skipping this one, because I feel like it's an important discussion to have, but I really don't want to upset or make anyone uncomfortable, so just bear that in mind. So to give you an idea of how well I May Destroy You represents rape, I want to look at another TV show that deals with similar issues, 13 Reasons Why. I'm choosing this specific example because it is, I believe, the last thing that I watched that featured a graphic rape scene, and it also happens to embody the general idea people have of rape very well. I think when you've never experienced it and you think of rape, the way that it's portrayed in 13 Reasons Why, Hannah's rape in any case, is pretty much how you would imagine it. I'm gonna be honest with you guys, I haven't watched the whole show. I haven't even watched the whole first season. I did pretty much watch the entire first season, but I did miss a couple of episodes, quite a few episodes actually, around the middle. I know that other characters are raped in the show, mainly Jessica, but for the purpose of this video I'm only going to be looking at Hannah and her experience. So, when you haven't experienced a certain traumatic event, you still have a pretty good idea of what it is. You associate it to certain images that are linked to either the stories that you've heard, but because rape is still pretty taboo in our society, the general idea people have of it is very much linked to how it's been represented in the media. And Hannah's rape is, in my opinion, a pretty good example of that general idea. So 13 Reasons Why is a show about a young girl who commits suicide and who leaves recordings behind for the people that she holds accountable for her decision to kill herself. At the end of the first season, we find out that one of the things that pushed Hannah over the edge was the fact that she's been raped by one of her classmates. First of all, when you look at Hannah, she's presented as a very pure and virginal character. From what I've seen in the show, although she's constantly being slut-shamed and bullied at school, there's nothing controversial about her sexuality that might indicate to the viewer that she had it coming. When it happens, she's at a party, but she's not acting extremely drunk or anything like that. When you see it happen, it's very graphic and detailed. You see Hannah repeatedly saying that she has to go, while her classmate is forcefully holding her down as she tries to fight him off unsuccessfully. Then afterwards you have the very traditional shower scene where you see Hannah getting undressed, and you see that her body is bruised and that she's very badly hurt, and then obviously later on she decides to kill herself. Now, I'm not saying that this isn't a valid representation of rape. It's pretty much the textbook idea of it. But my problem with it is that it is so very pervasive. And because it is so pervasive, actual rape survivors may be inclined to believe that it is the only valid experience of rape. Because as I've mentioned on my video on representation in popular culture, representation doesn't reflect reality. It creates its own reality, and that becomes an issue when people are led to question the validity of their real life experiences because it simply does not match the version of it that they've seen on TV. For instance, here are some classic misconceptions around rape that the media that I consume, that they consumed, or that my social environment in general led me to believe. I remember when I was in my early teens, I was pretty sure that if you had been raped, there was no way you could desire, let alone enjoy sex afterwards. I was also convinced that it was only really rape if you at least tried to defend yourself. And I was pretty sure that it tended to leave marks on your body, such as bruises, bleeding, and so on. Another thing that was absolutely inconceivable to me was the idea that a victim might cling to their abuser, that she or he may develop feelings for them as a way to deny the horror of what they had experienced. It's a pretty freaking form of denial, but in my mind, if you had been raped, there was no way you didn't know it. Because there was no ambiguity whether I saw it happening on TV or in a book. And therefore I just didn't understand the concept of denial very well. For me, it was always just too clear-cut for denial to make sense. So in my ignorant mind, if you stayed, for instance, in an abusive relationship, or if you didn't tell on someone who had abused you, then it wasn't really abuse. Again, in my mind, there was nothing to be unsure of. Because the way I'd seen it happen in the media, rape was one of the most brutal things you could ever experience. So how could you not be aware of that? How could your reaction not be just as brutal during and after the fact? As I mentioned, I was completely unaware of the fact that most of the time people who experience rape are in denial. Because in the movies and the TV shows, it happens chronologically. There's no ambiguity. It's rape. The audience knows it because the characters know it. The rapist knows it, and more importantly, the victim knows it. The woman, it's almost always a woman who gets raped on screen, is assaulted, there's violence, there's blood. And then you see her get in the shower, you see her bruised and damaged body, you see her cry, and then she's scarred for life. She's triggered every time somebody tries to touch her, and most of the time she ultimately kills herself. I'm not saying that such experiences aren't valid. I'm not saying that at all. Of course they are. But they're simply not the majority of experiences that I've heard about in real life or that I personally relate to. And this disparity between the way rape happens in real life and the way in which it is presented in the media is really harmful because it may actually push rape survivors even further into denial. In my personal experience, one of the hardest things about this traumatic experience is to acknowledge that it happened and that the way in which you reacted to it doesn't negate the fact that it was rape. You may be telling yourself something like, well, I didn't really react the way a true victim would. I didn't defend myself properly, if at all, and I had sex a couple of weeks later, so it means I wasn't actually traumatized. Actually, you may have completely forgotten about it for days or weeks or even months or years before looking back on it and starting to think that maybe it wasn't okay. So you may be telling yourself, it can't really have been rape because my understanding of rape, that is, the way that I've seen it on TV and the way that people around me have made it out to be, that just simply didn't look like what I've experienced. And the victims that I've seen on screen, especially, didn't react the way that I did. But it's important to remember that while our society denounces a specific version of rape, that is, a monster of a man violently forcing himself onto a deeply innocent girl, it simultaneously normalizes rape and abuse, especially within a relationship. And it romanticizes toxic behavior, making it seem as though stalking or being controlling, for instance, are just a natural part of the game of seduction. Think of movies such as 50 Shades of Grey or its even more fucked up version, 355 Days. And that is without mentioning the insane amount of rom-coms that do pretty much the same thing, only perhaps more subtly. And by framing coercion as a form of seduction, by romanticizing unbalanced power dynamics between men and women, Our society normalizes and even romanticizes rape and abuse, thus signaling to the audience that it is okay for some men to constantly violate the consent of women, that it might actually make them even more charming and seductive and masculine. And considering all this, it makes sense that victims tend to normalize rape when they experience it. Because we have repeatedly been told that, sure, there is a context in which it is monstrous to do such a thing, but we have also been led to believe that there is a right way to do it. Side note, I'm really not saying that getting raped in real life isn't just as awful and brutal as it is in the media. It is one of the most horrible things that you can experience. But in my opinion, there is one huge difference when it comes to the way in which rape tends to happen in real life and the way in which it is presented in the media, and that is certainty, the absence of ambiguity. As a woman who has a lot of girlfriends, we do talk quite a lot about this sort of thing, and every single time someone tells me about what they've experienced, they always use the language of uncertainty, even when there is absolutely no reason to. Someone once told me that when they were 15, a stranger had sex with them in the bathroom of a nightclub after they said no 14 times, and they're still reluctant to refer to it as rape. Perhaps because the guy didn't beat them up, or maybe because they didn't cry, or maybe because afterwards they carried on as though nothing had happened and didn't tell anyone. Or maybe because people tend to minimalize what they experience when they experience something traumatic, maybe they feel like the kind of rape that they've experienced isn't violent enough to actually count as rape, and therefore it can resemble the normalized, romanticized, and glorified version of rape that they've been told is excusable and justifiable. And this is typically when denial comes in. This is when you may start telling yourself that it was sex, not rape. Because the media and sometimes people around us have blurred the line so much between the two that we actually feel like it's a decision we can make. We can either make a big deal out of it and be slut-shamed and judged and make everyone who loves us go through all that. Or we can convince ourselves that it wasn't rape, that it was indeed just sex, and just forget about it. Which decision do you think is more painful to make? I know that these things are very difficult to discuss, but I just want to make it clear how difficult it is for victims to simply refer to what happened to them as rape. Because this word has come to be associated with a certain type of violence and with certain types of victims that very few of us identify with. It's a word that has often been defined in popular culture by people who have never even experienced it. It's a word that survivors now have to claim, and they have to justify how they reacted in that incredibly traumatic moment to people who, quite frankly, don't know what they're talking about. And I know some people may be thinking, well, it's fiction, of course it's not reality. Why does it matter if fiction has its own version of events? Why does it have to feel real? And honestly, because we can't tell the difference. Because fiction informs the way we think of the world around us, it informs our fucking reality. And because in most cases, what we believe is actually more important than what is true. I mean, this is something that I've witnessed, and it just makes me so angry that we have to fill the gaps. That we have to convince people that our experiences are valid and that we're fucking allowed to call it rape. Even if it doesn't look like what you think rape is, because it's not what you've seen on TV. And of course, there is no perfect way to represent rape in a symbolic way. That is, in a way that would encompass every single survivor's reaction to it and experience of it. When you want to represent trauma authentically, I think you have to do it in a specific way. And in my opinion, this is exactly what I May Destroy You did. Again, I don't want to get into spoiler territory too much, so I'm going to be a little vague about the details, but the show is centered on a black woman named Arabella and how she overcomes this trauma. By the way, in most TV shows and films that I've seen growing up, rape is something that mostly seemed to happen to white women, whereas in real life, women of color are actually more likely to be assaulted, although I believe that 80% of rapes that are reported to the police are reported by white women. So moving on from this horrifying side note, first of all, as a character, Arabella is just so authentic and real. I mean, she's definitely not the idealized sacrificial lamb, you know? She sort of tears down the idea that victim inevitably means angel. Because, you know, in the movies and TV shows, there's this sort of glorification around pain when it comes to women, as though it makes them somehow more pure and angelic. There's this sort of cult around female martyrs, and there's this powerful idea that the more a woman is pure and virginal, the more tragic it is for her to be soiled by rape. And what I really liked about I May Destroy You is that pain is never glorified. It's never portrayed as something that is pretty to look at. The victim doesn't have to be a blameless angel. Rape doesn't happen to angels who are then glorified into martyrdom. It happens to people, normal people, and it sucks, and it makes you act in a way that is shitty at times, and it's ugly, and there's nothing to be glorified. And you know what? That doesn't make it any less tragic. That doesn't make the victim responsible for what happened, and it doesn't make people who rape any less disgusting or guilty. You don't have to be perfect in order to be raped. I know that sounds basic, but I feel like so many survivors struggle with this, because with all of this glorification of rape survivors and how they overcome this trauma, there's just a huge focus on the victim, you know? How brave she is, how pure she is, how blameless she is. But the person who determines whether or not a rape is taking place is not the victim. It's the rapist. It's always the rapist. But because the focus is almost entirely on the victim, it almost feels as though the determining factor when it comes to rape is the victim. And that is just so wrong. And it makes it even harder for actual rape survivors to acknowledge what they've been through. I mean, at the end of the day, rape is rape. Regardless of whether or not the victim is naive or brave or innocent, there's no reaction for the victim that can justify or excuse abuse. I personally feel like for a long time, rape tended to be represented in a symbolic way. And the character who experienced it tended to be more of a symbol than an actual three-dimensional character who actually felt like a person. But in I May Destroy You, Arabella is the opposite of a symbol that stands for a specific group of women. She has so much interesting things going on. Like, her job is so interesting, her relationship with her friends, her parents, her roommate. I mean, she's not defined by the fact that she's been raped. Her personality doesn't revolve around that, like, not even a little bit. I mean, it's established that she's flawed, you know, she struggles to work on the story that she has to write. She goes out and has fun when she's supposed to be working. She does drugs, she sleeps around, and then someone slips something in her drink and rapes her. But it doesn't happen in that order. You don't see it chronologically the way you usually see it on screen. Instead, you see her carrying on as usual the next day. You see her going to work. There's no dramatic reaction from her at the beginning. She only experiences flashbacks of the assault. As I mentioned, rape is often portrayed in the media in a linear, chronological way, when in real life it's something that you tend to experience continually over and over again. So in I May Destroy You, I thought it was really well done, because you never actually see it happening. And I think it's partly to convey the fact that your brain doesn't really comprehend what is happening to you when you're being assaulted. You know, it's something that you can only deal with after the fact. But portraying it in that way also helps alleviate any kind of pressure concerning how a victim is supposed to react during such a traumatizing experience. Again, to me the message is that it doesn't fucking matter how you react. The blame is not on you. The blame is on the person who is assaulting you. There's no reaction or absence of reaction from the victim that can change that. Nothing that you did or didn't do can make it any less wrong or real. And I cannot emphasize how amazing it felt to watch something about rape and not feel like the character who experiences it is a perfect idealized image of everything you wish you could have done but didn't. Arabella just feels like an actual person who's been raped and who gets on with life. And that may seem pretty basic, but I've never seen a TV show or a film that managed to do that properly. I mean, I really like Arabella as a character because, again, she's just so authentic. She's like an actual person. She's not trying to serve as a symbol of wronged women in general or of stolen innocence. She's not perfect, you know, and she fucks up. And I actually like how you see her behave in a way that is quite toxic as well at times. I thought it really... it just kind of gets into how an experience like that can make you act in a way that is pretty shitty to the people around you, and I liked that the show addressed that. Because, again, I'm just so sick of the idealized portrayal of rape victims as the embodiment of virginity and innocence. Not that there's anything wrong with virginity and innocence, you know, we've all been there, but it's just so hard for rape survivors to be taken seriously, and given how often any indication that they enjoy sex or that they can be described as promiscuous, how often that is used to discredit them in court or even within their social environment, given how often a victim's sexuality is used to justify and excuse the behavior of the people who sold them. I don't know, I feel like it's important to underline that you can enjoy sex and you can have a lot of it consensually and you can still be raped. Obviously. Another thing that I really liked about the show is that through the experiences of Arabella's friends who are also assaulted, I just felt like the show really tried to redefine what we think of when we think of rape. Because when it comes to Arabella, it's acknowledged by pretty much everyone that it's rape, you know, nobody really questions that, not even the police. But where her friends are concerned, they're in more of quote-unquote grey areas. Not that there's anything grey about them, but their experiences simply do not fit the default definition of rape quite as easily. It goes into how it can be harder for a man to report sexual assault, how they're less likely to be taken seriously. It shows how it can take years for someone to associate a certain experience with rape, but it never undermines how traumatic it is for the people who experience it, because no matter how grey it is in terms of law and justice, there is no such thing as a grey area for a victim. I really liked how educational the show was as well. I mean, I actually learned quite a lot watching this show. For instance, there's this scene in which two people are having sex and the guy removes the condom without the consent of his partner, and they call it out as rape. And if you're a woman, I think it won't come off as a surprise, but this is something that me and most of my girlfriends have been through, and I kind of thought that this shit was normal. We literally talk about it like it's nothing, and I had never heard anyone around me denormalize or question this kind of behavior. You know, when you're a kid and you don't know a lot about the world around you, anything can feel normal. If someone around you acts like something is normal, then you're pretty much convinced that it is. And then you grow up and you realize that your parents are weird. And I just feel like there's a lot of growing up and learning that we haven't done when it comes to consent, and how serious it is when someone violates it. And we have to learn about these sort of things, but we shouldn't be learning about rape and assault through media created by people who don't know what they're talking about, like we have been for so long. It's not them who should be telling survivors if their stories are valid, or if they're real victims. It's not them who should be telling us if it was bad enough to justify us coming forward or going to the police. It's not them who should be telling us if we defended ourselves fiercely enough to be called brave. It's not them who should be telling us if we're allowed to call it rape, as though it's their word that they own and control, as though we have to ask for permission before using it. What really hit me when I was watching this show is just how important it is that people tell their own stories. And I obviously don't mean it in the sense that fiction is bad and that it has to be 100% autobiographic all the time. I'm obviously not saying that. But when you constantly represent rape in a way that makes actual victims feel illegitimate to even talk about what they've experienced because it feels so far removed from what they've been through, you're not starting an important conversation. You're not raising awareness. You're pushing people further into silence by talking over them and excluding them from their own stories that you know nothing about. Watching this show, I was just so inspired. I felt like it really encouraged people to tell their own stories, because at the end of the day, that's what it's doing, you know? It's telling stories. Stories about rape and assault. And you know what? It isn't awful to watch. I feel like sometimes we tell ourselves that some things need to be embellished, that some things need to be sugar-coated, that some things need to be distorted in a way that will make people want to hear and that will make people want to watch, else no one's going to be interested, else it's just going to be unbearable. But what I really learned from this show is that it isn't as bad as they make you think it is to actually hear the truth. It's actually quite exhilarating and empowering. And at the end of the day, isn't that the best thing you can take away from a piece of entertainment? Just having a part of you being like, what was I so afraid of? So, yeah, I truly cannot recommend this show enough. I know I probably didn't make it look like an easy watch, but it is actually funny and brilliant and plainly incredible. It kind of reminded me of Fleabag in the sense that it deals with very dark... Fuck. It kind of reminded me of Fleabag in the sense that it deals with very dark themes, but it's still funny somehow. I cannot believe that it hasn't been nominated for a Golden Globe. I mean, that is a topic for another day, but that is truly insane to me. It's definitely one of my favorite shows of 2020, and also in general, and I am just so very grateful that it exists. I hope this wasn't too much. I'm sorry if it was, but if you managed to make it to the end, thank you so much for watching. I hope it wasn't too triggering. I really hope it wasn't. I know that I haven't done a good job at actually presenting the show, but you don't need to know anything about it to watch it, to be honest. And also, I just didn't want to spoil it for anyone because it's just too good. I hope you're still having a good day. I hope I haven't ruined it for you. I sincerely apologize if I have. Yeah. Thank you so much for watching. Take care of yourself.